Good morning. Yes, as Gary says, I work at the University of London. This is one of our major landmark buildings in Russell Square. And the title of my presentation is about working with independent organisations. And I think some of the presentations that we've just been listening to is around government policy trying to steer independent organisations in a particular way, and how policies don't always have the impact that they imagine they will. The University of London is a microcosm of the very diverse sector that Steve Large described earlier. We don't have 165 institutions, but we do have 18. And they're 18 of some of the most prestigious brands in the UK. Brands such as King's, brands such as the London School of Economics, the Courtauld, which is just across the courtyard here. The University of London was created out of the merging, or the sort of bringing together in a federal way, of two institutions, that's King's and UCL, and they are the largest of our colleges in the Federation. And one of the principals, not King's or UCL, has observed that the University of London is not dissimilar to the EU. There are very large organisations within the Federation, and there are also some very small ones, like the Courtauld just across the road. 20,000 students, 200 students. There are also some smaller ones than that. The Institute of Cancer Research, it's all postgraduate, but less than 100 students. So some very large, some very small, some very dominant characters within the Federation, some that would rather not be in the Federation, but feel that it's necessary to be within the Federation. I think the similarities between the EU start to shine through. All of these institutions are independent. And they can leave the Federation whenever they wish. And in fact, a few years ago, Imperial College did leave the Federation. And the levels at which the colleges engage with the Federation are all at very different levels. There are some that just have used the brand in the past to get their own brand launched, and have now really disengaged quite considerably. The London Business School, not dissimilar, I guess, to maybe the UK if you're using the EU model. And there are others that are very much more still fully engaged, and necessarily so, like Heathrow College, who find the University of London an essential part of their own mission. What I'm going to describe is another aspect of government policy that's being trying to push through at the moment. They can't dictate this to us because we are independent, but something that they've been pushing through at other sort of public sector levels is around shared services. About 10 years ago, they created a sense of uniformity across the National Health Service and tried to bring services together there. And to a certain extent, they've been quite successful with that. There is now there's a computer system that links all of our hospitals together with national patient records, and there is a sharing of back office functions across the health service. And they would like to have that kind of sharing in order to create efficiencies across universities within higher education. So there have been a number of reports, the Gershon report in about 2004-05, and more recently the Diamond report last year, which was instigated by Universities UK. Now, the University of London has been doing shared services for a long, long time. These are the shared services that we have within the Federation, and some of them go back to the very beginnings of the Federation, which is 177 years old. The international programmes in the top left-hand corner is 150 years old. ULU goes back to a very early start, but in different forms. The Careers Group, about 100 years old. Senate House Library, right from the beginning. The University Computing Centre is only about 40 or 50 years old, but it's older, I've been told by my IT director, than Microsoft. So we have a good reputation in shared services, but each of these shared services operate in different ways, and as I said earlier, colleges do not have to use those services. They're independent in whether or not they use them. I'm going on to describe some of the most significant shared services. The international programs that I've described, 150 years old. It was originally called the external system. And the external system was to enable students from around the world who weren't able to come to London to study to actually get a University of London degree. And the idea is it's a very large distance learning program, probably the oldest in the world, is that students would learn by receiving materials by post, and more recently, over 100 years, have been working with local teaching colleges, and we have 100 recognised teaching colleges around the world who teach our degrees. But the actual degree that they are examined in is a London degree. Their exam papers are sent to examination centres around the world. It's about 400 of those. They're all accredited with identification, verification and other means. And then their exam scripts are shipped back to London and they are marked in London. So we do not federate out or franchise out the examination. The examination is kept in London. And currently we have 53,000 students on these programs around the world. And the turnover on that particular shared service is about £55 million, and that's just one aspect of the University of London. Some of our colleges use this extensively, others to a lesser degree. The idea is that it's a shared service in terms of infrastructure. Everyone gets a University of London degree rather than students at King's get a King's degree and students at the LSE get an LSE degree. But students on this programme get a University of London degree. And that the materials are all sourced from the colleges but distributed centrally at Senate House, the building that I work in. The essence of it is that some colleges use it more than others. The London School of Economics, which is just the other side of the Strand, has about 22,000 students on this programme alone, predominantly in Singapore and in Hong Kong. But on their own campus in London, they only have about 10,000. So they have twice the number of students internationally on the distance learning programme through us as they do here. And they've used that to differentiate markets as well. So it's a very significant shared service. The next shared service I'm going to describe is the Careers Group. The Careers Group is a very, very different model. It's used by about 12 of our colleges. The model is that there is some shared infrastructure at the centre, and that shared infrastructure would be expertise in particular subject areas, particular careers, advice. There's an aggregation of employers database. We have about 25,000 employers on our employers database. We provide shared services in terms of open days and in terms of subject-specific days. But the whole thing is white-labelled, as we call white-labelled, so that a student walking into the King's Careers Service would look and feel very much like the King's Careers Service. A student walking into the Queen Mary or the UCL Career Service, it would look and feel like their career service. But behind the scenes, there is a shared infrastructure. There's a transference of expertise, there's a pooling of expertise, and there's a sharing of things like a call centre for the first destination returns. It's an annual return that we have to do to identify where our graduates have employment. And other infrastructure. So it's a very large operation, very, very well regarded within the colleges, very well regarded by students, but completely invisible to most students because, as I said, it feels like the college's own careers group. Now, there are some aspects of that careers group which are exclusively to the University of London. There are other aspects which we have opened up to a much wider audience. There are now about 52 institutions who draw upon the careers group services for that DELI return, that governmental return that identifies where students are working 6 months after graduation. But others, like the on-site presence, is for the University of London. The next one that I'm going to describe is ULCC. ULCC has gone through quite a lot of changes. As I said, ULCC is a computing centre. It was started very much as a very single shared service across all of the Federation. There's an irony that I'm doing what I'm doing now because my very first job was at the London School of Economics, divorcing the LSE from ULCC services. They created and they hosted student record system management, HR, finance and so on. But in the mid-90s, that investment had gone past its natural and useful life, and colleges went their own way. In the succeeding decades, the last 2 decades, ULCC's reinvented itself and has now created a very much more different financial model and business model, and it provides services to over 300 institutions across the UK. Some of those are higher education, some of them are further education, there are some schools in there. But they host about 1.5 million students on their systems, and that's all in the area of a virtual learning environment. So that is a very, very significant shared service that's gone way beyond the Federation because the Federation felt it no longer needed a computing service, so it's had to reinvent itself. Some of these other ones are sort of varying degrees of shared service. This is the University Press that has fallen a little delinquent, but we are looking at reinventing that. The School of Advanced Study is a school for the promotion and facilitation of research in the arts and humanities. The housing services, and there's also within that student residential accommodation that provides support to students solely within the Federation. There's about 120,000 students across the whole of the Federation, and that supports them in finding accommodation in central London. The university itself has about 3,000 beds that it allocates to students in the Federation. So that gives you a sense of where we already have significant capability of sharing in the university. So we're just flipping through these. As I said, so there's some that are around just profit share, they're for the federal good, and there are some which are completely commercial, like ULCC, and there are some where we have to charge a semi-market rate, but we recognise that the 3,000 beds we have are there to be filled, and they're there for the recruitment purposes of the colleges, and so the market is tempered a bit, so our rents are lower than the private sector, but different organisational approaches and different business models. We also have other shared services which are less known, and these aren't really services to the Federation or to other things, but they're more around the way in which we manage employment of others. The Balfour BT Workplaces is an outsourced contract that we have at Senate House for the provision of hard and soft FM. We manage the employment contracts of the University of London Union. That's the student union that covers the whole of the Federal University. We have mixtures of employment contracts that we manage for something known as the London Deanery. The London Deanery are located in our building, and they are responsible currently, but not for very much longer, for post-qualification training for medics, nurses and other allied professional services. And the School of Advanced Study, all staff there are employed by the university, but a lot are actually on secondment from other institutions because of the nature of what they do. So it's very complex employment setups. Now I'm going to describe what we're doing now. Based on what the government was saying, that we've got to do more around the shared services arena, that the sector could be making far more savings, more economies of scale. They could be improving the quality of services through increasing the critical mass, like the careers group example. Using that as a bit of a launch pad, we're looking at across a raft of new shared services, and we've used KPMG in order to undertake a study for us. I've spoken about shared services for a number of years, and I've always felt that they've not gathered ground within the sector because they're thought of at too high a level. And as I said, we're all independent. No one is going to tell us to do anything. So no one's going to say, you are going to share your HR department, or you are going to share your finance department. And so you're never, I think, going to get people volunteering for that kind of seismic change. My view is that you have to look at services at a much more granular level, much more detailed level, and that they'll be chosen because at that detailed level they are either more efficient, more effective, or quicker to achieve. So we created a taxonomy. A taxonomy is a sort of a list of all services that we could possibly think of that are run in a university, and all services had the opportunity to be shared. We then identified from that list the ones that we thought had the greatest opportunity, and we went out to the sector, and KPMG interviewed about 40 finance directors and other senior managers at universities. And we identified that there was an existing, quite a lot of existing shared services being used across the sector. This is nationwide, this is across the UK, not just in England. And also there was a very much greater appetite to do more in that area. So we've assessed the demand, we did a demand analysis, and then the other parts of the KPMG model were to look at cost-sharing groups, CSGs, and also engagement with for-profits, and I'll come on to that again towards the end. So these are, this is the sort of the areas where we looked to survey. We looked around the student life cycle and subject areas within that, research support, HR, corporate services, sort of high-level planning, and so on. And you can see the general titles there. And we actually got down to 4 tiers of services. So the very large titles here, information technology, would be tier 1. And we broke it down to tier 4, which shows at a very granular level the sorts of services that we might share. And that was then taken through, so this is the questionnaire that was taken out. And the questionnaire also looked at both what we've got and what there is an appetite for. This is showing sort of where we already are now. So there are pockets, particularly around facilities management, where there is already quite a lot of sharing. But if I click to the next slide, you'll see it light up with the appetite that there is now to share. So institutions are now feeling maybe the pinch a bit more with regards to their finance, or have adjusted to the idea that they don't have to do everything themselves. And there is now a very, very high appetite, particularly around IT and facilities management, but also increasingly around HR. And interestingly, I think around the student life cycle and student support services as well. So generally, if you take this as the trend, the universities in the UK are now looking to share things between one another, and they don't necessarily feel that some of these things are differentiators between one another. So that gave us a lot of hope, and the KPMG report is going to our Board of Trustees on Wednesday this week, in 2 days' time, for it to be considered to be what we're going to be doing next. Sorry, I think I've just lost my microphone. And what are we going to be doing next is the subject of the other part of the KPMG report. One of the reasons why the government is interested in us creating shared services, and I think getting a little impatient as to why we're not creating more shared services, is that they changed the legislation in the UK in July in the annual finance bill. There was an EU directive some years ago which enabled VAT-exempt institutions to not be burdened with charging VAT between one another. That goes back quite a long time. I don't know exactly when that was created, but it was never recognised in the UK. That changed in July 2012. Sorry, by VAT I mean sales tax, value added tax. That changed in the UK. So previously, if I was providing services through ULCC, if I was providing hosting services or virtual learning environment services, I would need to charge sales tax to institutions for that. With this change in legislation, I will no longer need to do that, providing we shelter the relationship between the two institutions, one providing, one receiving services, under what's known as a cost-sharing group. A cost-sharing group has different characteristics. It cannot distort markets, it cannot make profits, it is there as a cooperative, and it lends itself very well to the university sector. But it's a way of avoiding costs. Now, if we can provide services, I think effective services already, if we're able to charge 20% less than a private operator, then I think that we're going to do well in the shared services arena, and that's another reason why that demand analysis is giving us great hope for developing more. The other part of it is though there are certain things that we wouldn't want to do ourselves, certain things that we think for-profit organisations can probably do better, and we'd like to start operating with them. Cost-sharing groups limits our ability to do that, but for example, why should the University of London recreate a University of London payroll system? It had one 20 years ago, it fell delinquent, and there are much, much better off-the-shelf payroll service providers that can do that for us. So part of the KPMG model is looking at what partners, what for-profit partners we might collaborate with and aggregate demand. So the CSG could be provision of services between one another, but also aggregate demand to make a more cost-effective contract to a for-profit partner. And that is also going to the Board of Trustees on Wednesday as to should we go to market for a for-profit partner or partners to help us develop these shared services. The last bullet point is around Wednesday's meeting. I have to make a pitch to take this further. If I'm successful, then very soon, next week or the week after, or maybe in a few months' time, once we've worked out what we're going to be asking, there'll be something going out in the EU Journal to procure that kind of partnership. In the meantime, we are continuing to develop our own shared services on a much more smaller scale, one that's got an awful lot of interest from across the Federal University and beyond. Sort of a pan-London shared service is in HR, human resources, and it's around the area of grievance investigation, disciplinary investigation, and mediation services that might arise from both grievance and discipline. That as a shared service is being very warmly received by institutions. But there are others as well. In IT, we're looking at creating a framework for interoperability between systems to create a lingua franca between our finance systems and our student record systems and our virtual learning environment systems. And there are others that we're sort of not waiting for the tender to come back, but we're developing more of. So I hope that gives you a sense of the University of London across the services that we provide, but also where we're heading.